Hey, thanks very much. When Peter gave me this topic, he said, what happened in the US elections? What are the implications for Australia? And I thought, oh, well, the second bit isn't going to occupy much. I've been on a plane all night. I haven't checked the news, so I presume that's still true. I thought there's been a huge amount of commentary about Trump and interpretation, so I thought I'd try and base mine in actual sort of presence there, which I was for most of the year last year, and try and give some sort of a feel for what's going on. I haven't done any of these for a while, so I've written the thing out, which I don't usually do, but otherwise we'll go completely off the rails. When on January the 20th, Donald Trump, newly inaugurated as president, came to the microphone to deliver his inaugural address, the nation and the world trembled. Would we now see the presidential Trump emerge, the man rising to the dignity of the office to give a piece of soaring rhetoric, promising to unite the country and appealing to, in that now tiresome phrase, the better angels of our nature? No, in a word. Trump gave his first act of government in the same manner as he had campaigned, on the attack. With the grandees of both parties gathered around him, he painted a nightmare picture of the contemporary USA, one in which a shambling, zombie-like parade of people marched through a devastated wasteland of a once great nation, tumbleweeds blowing through the deserted factories, rusting away in dying towns, etc., etc., etc. It went on for some minutes, all of which had been caused by the betrayal of the people who were sitting around him. The scenario was in one way absurd, of course. Trump is a pseudo-billionaire who made money by getting state tax breaks and property rezonings, fights to keep his hotels de-unionised, and has paid no tax for 20 years. The speech itself was written by Steve Bannon, his sinister special advisor, a former naval officer and Goldman Sachs trader, now an ethno-nationalist. The vision of America was Gothic, the reasons given for its decline mythical, and the agenda duplicitous. And yet I couldn't help giving a cheer or two at it. Firstly, because I couldn't stomach another piece of rhetoric about unity and coming together as someone else might have offered, the America as the last best hope of man. But secondly, because though the picture was exaggerated, Bannon and Trump's America was one I recognised. It's the America of the Northeast and Midwest, of Ohio, Michigan, Kansas, Tennessee. It's the America of dying big towns and small cities, where the downtown has a few streets of boarded up shops, where the auto parts factory that the place lived off has closed or shrunk its capacity. It's the place where the mall that sucked the life out of the downtown 30 years ago has now itself closed down and lies abandoned because no one wants to pay to demolish it. It's the place where unemployment has come down since the 2008 recession, according to the figures, but where part-time casual work has replaced full-time work. It's places where no one has had any money in their pockets for 5, 6, 7 years now, where the corner stores have all closed down and the church-run food bank has become the neighbourhood single food distributor. It's an America where painkiller and heroin addiction have become so prevalent that many of the people who do walk around the downtowns are in fact shambling zombies, and TV shows like The Living Dead have a degree of cool realism about them. It's above all an America which has been heading this way for so long that a younger generation has entirely forgotten what cities and towns used to look like, that they were once bustling places with rich interactions and collective civic life, underpinned by existing within common spaces. Even the mall, a privatised version of such, provided something of that through the 70s, 80s and 90s. By now you really have to be over 50 to remember a time when such places weren't starting to decline. These were the places Michael Moore talked about when he wrote an article, 5 Reasons Why Trump Will Win, early in 2016. These are the places which hold the 200 counties which voted for Obama twice and then went for Trump this time. These are the places that the Clinton campaign simply wrote off. The places Bernie Sanders desperately wanted to campaign for her in, instead of Arizona, where he was sent, a Brooklyn Jew turned Vermont hippie campaigning to Hispanic Democrats on the Mexican border. and was rebuffed. The places where unions wanted to campaign in and was stood down from. These are the places where, amidst a popular vote victory of 3 million for Hillary Clinton, delivered Trump presidency by around 100,000 votes in total. Who were these voters? They weren't Tea Partiers or Trumpistas, crazies in tricorn hats gathering in Walmart car parks and babbling on about fiat money and Vince Foster, one of the 72 people that the hard right alleges the Clintons have had killed during their careers. They were the people I met in a bar in North Philadelphia 6 weeks before the election, the night I concluded that Trump had a really good chance of winning. I'd gone to see a rally by a biker group who called themselves the Deplorables, naming themselves after Hillary's remark that half of the Trump supporters were a basket of deplorables. There are a bunch of guys who are so pumped up for Trump that they decided to put on an ad hoc road tour from Nebraska through to DC, 20 cities just to spruik for Donald Trump. There was a lot of that going on around America at the time, and the event itself was nothing much. Half a dozen nut jobs and borderline neo-Nazis on their knockoff Harleys talking about, well, fiat money and Vince Foster. I went into the bar next door to order an Uber after it was all over, and the bar was one of those great American bars which is all in the round with the barman and bartenders in the middle, and everybody's seated around each, and some sort of basic obligation that you have to talk to each other. There were about half a dozen people there, a couple of guys in suits and ties, a woman you knew was an old hippie chick, a couple of guys in work shirts, their names on the pocket. They all loathed Trump, and they were all going to vote for him. Pennsylvania was the state Hillary had to win to block Trump. Philadelphia is the city you have to win big to win Pennsylvania. North Philadelphia is the area you have to win Philadelphia if you're Democrats, because it's white and you have to talk it round. And as they talked about someone having to do something and Trump being an asshole, but maybe an asshole's what we need, sorry, asshole, an asshole's what we need, I realised that outside of rallies in those key states, I had not heard one working or middle class person talk enthusiastically about Hillary Clinton. Not one. And we know what happened. But how did it happen? How did we get to that flashpoint historical situation? Here's a few milestones along the way. The first and most obvious one is that Bill Clinton in the 90s committed to neoliberalisation and globalisation in concert with the Republican Congress, without putting in place what would be required to compensate for such: a massive reinvestment in urban and infrastructure development, retraining, education and the like. Instead, what had been centres of production became centres of consumption. Malls replaced mills, and they were even often housed retro chic style in former red brick mill buildings. People shifted into service and retail jobs, and the money to keep demand going was created by the expansion of personal debt. This shift by no means filled the gap, but it plugged it enough that hard-hit Americans could be persuaded to blame themselves if they weren't doing well, to rely on the American spirit and take second and third jobs. I don't know if you remember the start of Michael Moore's film about 9/11, where it's got George W. Bush interviewing a woman in front of a town hall audience, and he's saying, "This woman, they tell me, she worked 3 jobs." And he goes, "Only in America," and everybody applauds. After the 2000 crash hit and Obama was elected, he was urged by left Keynesians such as Paul Krugman to use the opportunity to create a huge stimulus reinvestment package, something like $3 or $4 trillion. This would have been linked to a recovery this would have been a linked recovery to a green jobs package, in which America's crumbling infrastructure would have been replaced by green, efficient, high-tech, new bridges, roads, light rail, high-speed rail, millions of new jobs and hundreds of thousands of apprenticeships created. Whether Obama was willing to do this is something we'll find out from the memoirs to come. The centre-right Treasury team he appointed certainly wasn't, but the real barrier was Congress. Ostensibly Democrat-controlled from 2006 to 2010, it was in reality dominated by a group of Democrats known as Blue Dogs. Elected from areas that vote Republican in the presidential vote, they hoped to keep their seats by being fiscally conservative, Presidents come, presidents go, but if you want a congressional career in the States, you're looking at 40 years of continuous fundraising. They put out a flat no to any large-scale stimulus package, limiting it to $1 trillion, not nearly enough. They lost their seats in 2010 anyway, and the House of Reps became solidly Republican, and it was gridlock from then on. Simultaneously, the banks, pumped up with billions of dollars from quantitative easing, did not loosen their lending practices, which they had tightened after 2008, having opened them far too widely before then. This was a product of the financialisation of the global economy and the deep decline in the ground level of the US economy. Put simply, there was no return on investing in the US economy. It's just easier to invest in global future funds. Parallel to this process of decline in the old industrial economy had been a rise in the knowledge and culture industries, in line with the development of a high-tech economy and a consumer media culture. And this had taken what was a smaller subclass of culture and knowledge workers to having a size and importance which made them a class in their own right. Increasingly, their values, universalist, globalising and abstract, started to become dominant media values, so much that one can now call this group the progressive class, for ease of mention. Increasingly, a certain level of mass culture has come to be produced for this class itself. You can see this now in America, things like, for example, late night TV shows, movie awards nights, that sort of thing. Things that were once made for the mass, for an audience of 100 million, 150 million, are now made for a smaller group. Now they're part of the progressive class reinforcement, so where you once had glamour, etc., 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 you now have, discourse about resistance and morality and moralising. 40 years ago, the Johnny Carson Tonight Show could gain 50 million viewers a night out of an adult population of 175 million. It could be watched by left and right, rural and city people, everyone, including a large black audience, even though it was totally white. Today, the 3 Tonight Shows on the mainstream networks rate about 12 million viewers out of a 300 million population. And they are, without question, resolutely anti-Trump, pro-Hillary, progressive, hipsterish. They communicate to tens of millions of people that there is nothing for them here, nothing to see, and most are happy to take the hint. For a mass of middle America, mass-produced culture of a certain type, including the news media, is now simply the propaganda of their class antagonists. And the antagonism is real. As the fortunes of the progressive class have risen, those of the old working and middle classes have fallen. They were once at the centre of post-war American culture, of movies, music, cars and TV. Their heroes and idols, from John Wayne, Frank Sinatra and Marilyn to Bruce Springsteen, were the world's heroes. Now, when there is an outbreak of public mourning, it's for a figure like Steve Jobs, a near literal god to the progressive classes. Jobs, the black skivvied information culture mover and shaker, began as a Californian hippie, a Maharishi follower and an LSD advocate, and transferred that spirit to computers and then to the iPhone and all its works. What the progressive class find most affirming about a figure like Jobs is that he, with others, evolved these transformative products, changed the world out of nothing but ideas and ingenuity. But that is exactly what a class whose worth is based on physical labour, hard work and long hours find most alienating and negating about the new world. Indeed, to anyone locked out of the world of IT, and around 30% of Americans, though they all have smartphones, have only a rudimentary idea of how they work or to make them do more than basic tasks, such celebration seems like a denial of all that is at the centre of their lives. The processes whereby people accrue money and power seem magical and invisible to them. One example of how this is registered in the popular culture is in the Twilight series, about a clan of good vampires and the love affair between one of them and a human woman, Bella. Everybody knows Twilight, don't they? It's sold about 20 million copies, huge film series, okay, basically. In Twilight, the vampires aren't archaic and aristocratic, which is what was the heft of earlier vampire tales. They're smooth and modern. They live in architect-designed houses. They collect modern art. Their source of wealth is investments over the several hundred years of their lifespan, which pays off, obviously, and leaves them comfortably off. The humans, Bella's family and friends, by contrast, are screwed. They're from broken families, they live in degraded neighbourhoods, they are lost as to how to get ahead or how the world works. The vampires feed discreetly off the people, but feed they do. And that is, in reality, how many people see the class split now. And that is one reason why, to the bewilderment of many, a figure like Hillary Clinton can be seen as the vampiric one, while Donald Trump is seen as the friend of the average Joe and Jolene. Though Trump's wealth has come from branding in the last 3 decades, he retains the image of being a builder, a hard hat guy, someone who makes things happen. Trump recalls to many the social contract of post-war Keynesian capitalism, that while the boss will make his millions, the workers will make a fat wage as well. And most importantly, they'll make it from unskilled or basic skilled labour, the sort of work you can turn up to without having any special degree or fancy knowledge. Hillary, by contrast, appears to have gained her power and wealth from precisely those invisible processes that negate the value of physical labour. This was reinforced when John Podesta's emails were leaked by WikiLeaks, and we all got to see the dizzying amounts of money flying around for the Clinton Foundation and their friends. And for what? For nothing except a series of favours, bullshit speeches and future considerations. The third part of Trump's appeal has obviously been foreign policy and the notion of a renewal of American greatness. This, of course, ties back into the class shift, because through the post-war Keynesian period, the American working class could, to a degree, be brought off by the glory associated with American hegemony over the rest of the world. There was always more myth than reality associated with this, of course. America lost every major war since the Second World War, but it would occasionally stage small wars like Grenada or Panama invasions to affirm its power for the American audience. That all came to grief, of course, with the Bush administration's adventure in Iraq. Obama's victory took advantage of that dip in confidence to propose a different sort of foreign policy, at least on the surface and at least at the start, multilateral, consultative, seeking common grounds and agreements. For the left, Obama was simply continuing the American empire by other means, and the drone wars were simply the Steve Jobs version of imperialism, smart, high-tech, targeted and modular. For many mainstream Americans, however, this was a haunting gap, a lack of boots on the ground. The myth sustained by these small boutique wars, Grenada, Panama and even the Gulf War, offered the chance for that sort of thing, boots on the ground without risk. Obama, by any real assessment, is a warrior imperial president. But drones and airstrikes don't deliver what many people wanted. Pictures of armour-suited Marines giving candy to barefooted brown kids, or similar motifs for the public consumption. The same was true of immigration. For the left, Obama is the deporter-in-chief. For many in the mainstream, his efforts within the narrow confines of executive power to do things like excluding families with children from deportation made him complicit with the Third World takeover of the United States. All of it came back to this fundamental culture class split, that Obama's methods and style were those conducive to the ruling class, which is one reason why they found it so easy to ignore the actual impact of his actions, and for that reason were to be despised as a sellout of America. 2016 was thus the year that the rising new progressive class took on the mantle of the establishment, while the right, effectively handing over politics to Trump's insurgency, became heirs to the tradition of the yippies, the hippies and the punks, the disruptors of American pomposity. Old America had largely stopped consuming culture, as I've mentioned, but there is one thing they can't get enough of, and that's reality TV shows. The New York Times did an analysis of the 35 most watched shows in the US a few weeks ago and found that in the Midwest, West and South, almost none of them are scripted dramas or comedy, let alone news. They are all shows like 20 Kids and Counting, My £1,000 Mormon Marriage, Bachelorette Bucket List, etc., etc. Hundreds and hundreds of these programs pumped out by channels such as TLC, minor cable channels on the back of the dial, which get huge audiences across the middle of America. And of course, Trump's campaigning style was in that manner, the Jerry Springer mode of confrontation, the personal turf war, the construction of civility as hypocrisy, which of course it often is. So Trump's use of nicknames like Low Energy Jeb or Lying Ted Cruz, etc., etc., his taunting interruptions, his head fakes, his suggestions that Ted Cruz's dad helped Lee Harvey Oswald shoot JFK, his use of his press conference announcing a primary win in Indiana to sell Trump steaks, Trump wine, inviting Bill Clinton's ex-mistresses and possible rape victims to be in the audience for the presidential debates with Hillary. These were all things that are natural to the sort of world of reality TV shows, The Real Housewives and such and such and such and such. They're not only legitimate tactics, they're the way you conduct relationships between people. But of course, to the actual political culture as inherited, they're anathema. And the veteran broadcaster Tom Brokaw put it as simply as possible, Trump is the moment where the principles of the culture have overtaken the principles of the politics and transformed it. Trump's audacity made the Hillary Democrats identify themselves as the highborn, arrogant establishment, perpetually shocked and perpetually offended, the taking of offence having become a defining political act of the progressive class. The strategy not only worked to sour Hillary's support among sections of the working and middle class, and not merely those sections most distant from trade union membership, who were the isolated workers that Republicans used to pick up. It persuaded the Hillary team to effectively abandon campaigning among that class as a class, and to try and put together a majority from a patchwork of groups: students and the young, African Americans, some Latinos, a third of Latinos voted for Trump, Asian Americans, a third of Asian Americans voted for Trump, LGBT Americans, moderate independents, and Republicans aghast at Trump. It worked, but not where it was needed. And the greatest miscalculation was class versus gender. The Hillary team ran incessant ads about Trump as a sexual abuser, which he obviously is, hoping that they would detach enough working and middle class women, and it absolutely didn't work. 65% of non-college white educated women voted for Trump, 55% of all non-college educated women voted for Trump, and 45% of college educated women voted for Trump. And if there was ever a bailiwick that Hillary should have won, it would have been college educated women. So it was a disaster, and it's as clear a result as you want to about the sort of class split I'm talking about and where people's affiliations and loyalties lie. So when all was said and done, the Democrats really didn't deserve to win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin and Michigan. Team Hillary had offered such areas nothing substantial until the Bernie Sanders insurgency came along and made a party split a threat that she had to deal with. And had she won, we all know today that what we'd be fighting against would be the TPP, which she would have revived to put back on the table, and we'd be struggling tooth and nail to preserve the pharmaceutical benefits scheme against the threat of that, at the same time as she poured special forces into Syria. Trump's victory then is epochal, as the recent appointment of a conservative SCOTUS judge, who may be there for half a century, has shown. But the most important takeaway for the left may be that the progressive working class fusion alliance that defined left politics for half a century has now been sundered completely and will have to be put together in a new form, and not as something where we can assume that the values are shared. If it isn't, then genuine leftists, those believing in both socialism or something like it, as well as liberation by way of gender, class and other social dimensions, will for some time have no major political home. Thank you very much.